The sun beat down mercilessly over the small frontier town of Dry Creek, its dusty streets bustling with miners, merchants, and desperate souls chasing luck and gold dust. The town square was alive with the noise of bartering, stomping boots, and the crack of the auctioneer's whip. In the crowd stood Caleb Rawlins, a rugged, solitary man in his early 40s. He wore the weathered look of a man who had spent too many years alone in the mountains, chasing veins of gold that never glittered quite enough to ease the loneliness. Inside him, Caleb wasn't there for company. He had no use for people, or so he told himself. He had come down from his cabin for one reason, to bid on new mining tools and perhaps a sturdy mule to help haul supplies back up the ridge. His claim had recently started producing better yields, and he intended to double down before winter set in Dot as the auction progressed. Caleb leaned against a post, his battered hat tipped low over his eyes, half listening to the droning voice of the auctioneer. He barely paid attention as the man announced, "Next lot a full domestic team. Strong, capable, house-trained, able to cook, clean, and tend to farm duties. A rare fine 5-in-1. Caleb looked up briefly, assuming it was another work gang of laborers or perhaps even livestock. His gaze drifted to a wagon parked beside the podium. Inside stood a tired-looking woman in her late 30s with her 4 children, huddled close to her skirts, 3 boys ranging from about 10 to 3 years old, and a baby girl cradled in her arms. Their clothes were worn and patched, their expression solemn, too old for their years. Still, Caleb thought nothing of it. He wasn't interested in anything domestic. But when the bidding started low, so low it could have been mistaken for a bag of nails, Caleb, distracted and impatient, raised his hand out of reflex, thinking the auctioneer had moved on to tools. Sold to Mr. Caleb Rawlins. The auctioneer barked, slamming his gavel. The crowd murmured. Caleb's brow furrowed as he realized the auctioneer had gestured toward the family. The woman looked stunned. The children didn't move. "Wait," Caleb said, stepping forward. "What in the hell did I just buy?" The auctioneer gave him a half-hearted smile. "Indentured family, sir. 5 in total. 6-month contract. Widow Mary Lou Hawthorne and her 4 young'uns. Town law says debt must be paid. She couldn't. They were surrendered by the church." Caleb's face hardened. "I thought this was a supply auction." "It is. People are supplies too in times like these." Caleb turned toward the family, unsure what to do. He didn't believe in owning anyone, much less a mother and children. He tried to back out, arguing with the sheriff and the town clerk, but the law was clear. Either honor the purchase and ensure the family was fed, housed, and given work, or be fined for disrupting legal debt proceedings. Besides, he was already on the record and had paid. Grudgingly, he approached the woman. "You got a name?" he asked roughly. She looked him straight in the eye, shoulders square despite her thin frame. "Mary Lou Hawthorne. My husband died in the floods last year, left us with nothing but debts. I didn't ask for this, but I'll work. So will my boys." "We won't be a burden." Caleb scratched his beard. "Didn't ask for you neither, but looks like you're coming with me." And just like that, Caleb Rawlins, the man who hadn't shared his home or his heart with anyone in over a decade, left the auction not with tools or a mule, but with a widow and 4 children. Dot as they loaded onto his wagon. The children sat in silence. Mary Lou clutched her baby protectively. Caleb kept stealing glances at them, already regretting the entire mess. He didn't know their names, didn't want to. He just wanted to get back to his quiet mountain life and figure out how to survive. 6 months with strangers under his roof. What he didn't yet realize was this mistake wasn't the start of 6 months of suffering. It was the beginning of something far greater than gold. Caleb Rollins' cabin wasn't much to look at, just timber walls and a crooked chimney perched on the side of a rocky slope, half a day's ride from Dry Creek. He had built it with his own hands, board by board, over the years. It was small, dark, and silent just the way he liked it, but now that silence was shattered from the moment Mary Lou and her 4 children stepped inside. The cabin was transformed into something Caleb never planned for, a home full of life. Mess and noise. The boys, Samuel, the oldest at 10, Henry, 7, and little Jesse, 3, brought an energy Caleb hadn't felt in years. Samuel tried to act like a man, helping his mother and keeping his brothers in line. Henry was curious, poking at Caleb's mining gear and asking endless questions. Jesse followed Caleb around with wide, silent eyes, clinging to a battered toy. Horse, the baby Lily, cried half the night and babbled the rest. Caleb was overwhelmed. He'd offered them a separate bunkhouse, but Mary Lou had seen the holes in the roof and politely refused. So now they all shared the single cabin Caleb on his bedroll near the fire, and the family squeezed into the loft under a patchwork of blankets. Mary Lou kept her word. She worked from dawn to dusk washing, cooking, mending clothes, and keeping the children fed and busy. She never asked Caleb for a thing. She was proud, clearly, and though she didn't speak much, her dignity hung around her like armor. Caleb admired that, though he'd never admit it out loud. Still, things were tense. Caleb wasn't used to company, and the children weren't used to men like him, silent, towering, always frowning. He didn't know how to talk to kids. He didn't know what to do with a woman in his home. He hated how they looked at him like they were waiting to be punished. One evening, after supper, Jesse walked over and silently handed Caleb a small drawing, 5 stick figures in front of the cabin. Caleb frowned at it, confused. Jesse pointed to one figure taller than the rest. "That's you," he whispered. "You don't smile." Caleb grunted, unsure how to respond. He tucked the drawing in a crate and changed the subject. But something about it stayed with him. As days passed, small things began to shift. Caleb caught Henry sneaking pebbles into his mining pans, pretending to strike gold. Instead of scolding him, Caleb showed the boy how to spot fool's gold and pan properly. Samuel offered to chop wood and helped without being asked. Even baby Lily reached for Caleb's beard once, giggling. He was a mystery to them, but not a monster. Meanwhile, Mary Lou was slowly adapting. She reorganized the cabin without asking, cleaned shelves Caleb hadn't touched in years, and even found a way to fix the squeaky floorboard that had annoyed him since forever. She did it all without complaint, though Caleb caught her staring out the window some nights, looking lost. They barely talked about their pasts, but the air between them held unspoken truths. One night, a thunderstorm rolled through. The children were frightened, especially Jesse. Caleb, half asleep by the fire, heard footsteps and looked up to see the boy trembling nearby. Caleb sat up and held out a hand. "You want to sit?" Jesse nodded, crawling into Caleb's lap. The boy's small body shook against Caleb's chest, and without thinking, Caleb wrapped his arms around him. He didn't say a word. Neither did Jesse. It was the first time in years someone had leaned on Caleb for comfort, and it broke something open inside him, something he'd buried since he was a teenager. He remembered his younger brother, Eli, who had died in a river accident when they were boys. Caleb had always blamed himself. That guilt had driven him away from people, from family, from love. He'd sworn never to let anyone close enough to hurt again. But now, this small boy had crept into his guarded heart. And he wasn't alone. The walls of the cabin might have still been the same, but everything inside them was changing. Caleb found himself fixing shoes for the children, carving toys, and even cooking breakfast when Mary Lou was busy. He'd grumbled the whole time, but he did it. He still told himself this was temporary. just a few months. Then they'd leave, and he'd go back to his quiet life. But something in his chest was stirring, and deep down, Caleb Rawlins knew 6 months would never be enough to go back to being alone. The first heavy snows came early that year. The once dusty paths of Dry Creek's mountains turned slick with ice and silence. Caleb Rawlins, now more than halfway through his 6-month contract with Mary Lou and the children, was up at dawn every day, determined to make the most of the mining season before winter shut everything down. He had started to change. Though he refused to say it out loud, the kids had grown used to his gruffness. Jesse had practically adopted him, following him everywhere. Henry was asking to help with real mining work, and Samuel had begun carving wooden pieces to sell in town, trying to contribute. Even Lily reached for Caleb when she was fussy. As for Mary Lou, there was a calm between them now, a respectful rhythm of shared space and unspoken partnership, but Caleb still carried a quiet distance. He told himself he was only responsible for their safety and well-being, not their hearts. Then came the cave dash-in. It happened just after noon at the North Shaft, a part of his mind he had never fully reinforced. Caleb was inside, checking a promising vein of gold when the ground shuddered. A wall of dirt and rock collapsed, pinning his leg and cutting off his escape. He was trapped, bleeding, cold, and alone in the dark. He drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering apologies to his dead brother, to Mary Lou, to the kids. It wasn't fear that overwhelmed him, but regret. He realized in that moment that he wanted to live not for gold, but for the messy, noisy, stubborn people waiting back at the cabin. Mary Lou had sensed something was wrong when Caleb didn't return by sundown. Without hesitation, she saddled a mule and took Samuel and Henry with her to the shaft. They dug for hours, calling his name, tearing through rock and snow until Samuel's shovel struck Caleb's boot. He was barely breathing when they pulled him free. For days he lay feverish in bed, his leg bound and ribs bruised. Mary Lou nursed him quietly, tending to him like she'd once cared for her husband. She boiled herbs, soothed his fever, and even forced him to eat when he refused. She hardly left his side. During that time, the cabin became something else entirely. A haven, not just a shelter. Mary Lou took over the homestead, managing firewood, meals, even basic mining records. She proved sharp with numbers and even sharper with judgment. She fixed things Caleb hadn't bothered with in years: shelves, hinges, the broken fence. She read aloud to the kids in the evening, and Caleb, half-conscious, found himself smiling. At the sound of her voice, when he was well enough to sit up, Caleb finally spoke to her, really spoke. "You saved my life," he rasped. Mary Lou sat by his side, hands folded in her lap. "We were never going to leave you behind." "I thought I could do this alone," he said, "that I had to. But I didn't know what I was missing." She met his eyes gently. "Sometimes we survive so long on our own, we forget how to live with others. But that doesn't mean we don't need them." There was a long pause between them. Then Caleb whispered, "I lost my little brother when I was 14, drowned in the river. I was supposed to be watching him. After that, I just stopped, trusting myself to care for anyone." Mary Lou reached out and took his hand. "You didn't fail him, Caleb, and you're not failing now." That winter, as the snow piled high, the cabin filled with something warmer than fire trust. The boys no longer called him Mr. Rawlins. Jesse said "Pa" once by accident, then turned red, but Caleb only smiled. Henry begged to learn to pan properly, and Samuel sat beside Caleb every evening, learning how to manage the gold records. Mary Lou even laughed one night, truly laughed, when Caleb burned the stew. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and he realized he wanted to hear it again. when a slick-talking land baron from Dry Creek rode up in spring, offering Caleb gold to sell off the family now that their indenture was nearing its end. Caleb stood in the doorway and said one word: no. "They're not mine to sell," he added, "and even if they were, I'd sooner burn this cabin down than give up what they've brought into my life." The land baron scoffed and rode off, but the kids heard. So did Mary Lou. Later that night, she stood in the doorway, moonlight on her face. "You called us yours," Caleb nodded, "because you are." That night, without contracts, promises, or payment, something real was formed between them. Not out of obligation, but out of love earned. Not bought. Spring in the mountains melted the last of winter's ice, revealing muddy trails, green patches of grass, and wildflowers blooming along the ridges. But for Caleb Rawlins, something far deeper had thawed his heart, once frozen by years of grief and solitude, had begun to beat again with purpose. The 6-month indenture was over. Legally, Mary Lou and her children were free to go. The debt had been paid, the contract fulfilled. There were no more obligations tying them to Caleb or his cabin. And yet, on the morning they were free, no one packed a single bag. Instead, the children helped fix the fence. Mary Lou baked bread. Caleb repaired Jesse's toy horse. Life, somehow, had become natural together. Still, Caleb felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. He had fallen into a rhythm with his family, but now he had to choose whether he wanted to make it permanent, and more importantly, whether they did. One afternoon, he called Mary Lou out onto the porch. The sun was low, casting golden light across the mountains. Caleb held 2 pieces of paper. One was the deed to a small plot of land he'd purchased near a nearby creek land that Mary Lou could claim as her own. The other was a letter formally ending the indenture contract. He handed them to her. "You're free now," he said gently. "You can build your own home, start again on your terms. I figured you'd want that." Mary Lou took the papers and looked at them quietly. "You bought me land? You've earned it. And then some. And you'd send us off just like that?" she asked, her voice soft, unreadable. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Only if that's what you want. I just ... I didn't want you to think you had to stay. Not because of pity or obligation. I've had people walk away before. I figured this time I'd leave the gate open." There was silence for a long moment. Then Mary Lou looked up at him. "We're not staying because we have to, Caleb. We're staying because we want to. I've never seen my boys smile the way they do here. I've never seen Jesse so attached to anyone, or Samuel so proud of his work, and I've never felt safer." She paused, then added, "And I've never met a man who loved without saying it, but showed it in every single thing he did." Caleb swallowed hard, blinking against the emotion in his throat. "I never thought I'd have a family again. I never thought I deserved one." Mary Lou stepped closer. "Well, maybe it's not about what we deserve. Maybe it's about what we build." That night, over a simple dinner of stew and cornbread, Caleb stood and cleared his throat. The children turned to him expectantly. "I know this house is small and rough," he began, voice trembling just slightly, "but if you all would have me, I'd like you to stay, not as debtors, not as guests, but as family. I can't promise I'll always get things right, but I'll try. Every single day." There was a pause, then Jesse stood on his chair and shouted, "You're already our pa." The table burst into laughter and tears. Caleb knelt down beside Jesse, pulled him close, and then looked to each of the others. "That goes for all of you." Mary Lou nodded slowly. "Then we're home." In the weeks that followed, the cabin transformed again. Caleb built a new room with Samuel's help. Mary Lou planted a garden near the front porch. Henry learned to fish, Jesse learned to read, and Lily learned to walk straight into Caleb's arms. Their story spread across Dry Creek. Whispers of the gold miner who bought a family and ended up with something richer than gold made the rounds. People watched in awe as Caleb Rollins, the loner who once avoided eye contact, now smiled at every corner, surrounded by laughter and muddy boots. One day, he rode into town with Jesse beside him and posted a letter at the general store. It read, "To Eli, I thought I lost everything when I lost you. Spent years digging holes, trying to fill one in my heart. But I finally struck gold, brother, not in the earth. In a family I never saw coming. I never planned to be a father. But life had better plans. And this time, I'm not running from it, Caleb." He sealed the letter, addressed it to no one, and left it on the postboard. Then he rode home, where his family waited, not the one he was born into, but the one he chose, and in that choice he found everything.